The next delta comes in at $3.82 for some possible profit taking and realignment. Anything above $3.82 opens the door for $4.44, which is the highest delta right now that Scalper has given. You guys can see my screen.
Yeah.
Okay, sweet.
Yeah.
We are we are going to just touch on a quick and brief XRP analysis. We're going to kind of pick up where we left off yesterday, but I want to go over and take a look back at previous Zoom calls that we've had, taking a look in depth at deltas, and just explain why it's so important to be a part of a community like this right now, where we have access to institutional insights and we're not being distracted by all of the manipulative tactics. I mean, I even just seen Waters Above Crypto and the Bearable Bull do another $15 XRP price prediction video 2 days ago, and it's got like 44,000 views on YouTube or something, right? And I'm like, I got nothing against Waters Above and the work that he does. I don't really like Bearable Bull personally, but it's just straight up retail manipulation when instead in this community we have access to institutional insights on a day-to-day basis, and the levels in which we have access to we need to see overcome before we can expect any high-end prices. And so I want to just show you guys the level of accuracy that we have been trading with, and to just annotate and remind you guys, excuse me, to avoid these types of things. So I literally was on, somebody sent me something on TikTok today, and I opened up TikTok, watched the video that they sent me, and then did one swipe. One little swipe is all it took, and this video popped up, and it's of this lady. I don't know who the heck she is or he is. I'm not here to debate the gender, but um, they're talking about how XRP is going to be worth $27,000 per token because of Fedwire going live, right? Absolute garbage. And I'm going to just go ahead and say that probably nothing is going to happen to the price action of XRP on the day that Fedwire goes live. And if it does and I'm wrong, guess what? I'll be rich anyway, so I won't really care that I'm wrong. But that's just my 2 cents. We're going to continue to operate in this trading environment until something in terms of written regulatory clarity shifts. And that's not going to happen this month. I'm just going to go outright and say that. And if I'm wrong, like I said, and XRP does skyrocket to astronomically high prices, then we're all going to be celebrating in Belize or the Maldives regardless. So, whatever. But this is the time to be avoiding things like this and to tap into a community like ours. So, just to show you guys what I'm talking about, we're going to go over a high-end price analysis on XRP in case we do flip risk on. Scalper has put out some high-end institutional deltas here at about $4.44. I want to take a look at that potential. If we did see some higher delta levels surpassed, how that could open the door for those higher prices. We'll get to that in just a second. But again, keep in mind, we need to see the fundamentals supporting that type of environment, right? So let's go back before we touch on yesterday's Zoom call. I just want to show you guys, this is back from almost a month ago, June 16th, 2025. And at roughly about 19 minutes and 35 seconds into this Zoom call, we had identified the $2.36 level on XRP. And we had mentioned at the time that the market sentiment was starting to deteriorate. And at that point in time, we had drawn out an analysis where we said that if the sentiment deteriorates further, we're most likely going to revisit the $2.09 threshold. And then I mentioned in this particular video that if $2.09 is broken, the next bearish target that we're going to start to accumulate some XRP is at $1.98 to $1.99. $2. Inversely, starting on XRP, the bearish case, if sellers start to show their hand at $2.36, the sentiment worsens, buyers are unable to overpower, and we start to see sellers aggressively show their hands. $2.09 is obviously, of course, going to be the revisitation level where we could possibly start to see a reaccumulation of buy orders and reassess market fundamentals. Okay. If we break $2.09, that's going to open the door for $1.99, which is our next buy delta underneath of that. Sure enough, a few days after the Zoom recording, that is exactly what happened. Trading from delta to delta, this is the most accurate institutionally based community on the face of the retail spectrum. If we go back and we look at the charts, you can see here And again, the proof is in the pudding. I always like to give you guys timestamps. Look at the date, June 16th, so we can go back on the charts. June 16th. This is where price action was trading at. And in that Zoom call, I had mentioned that if we failed to break this key delta zone, that we were most likely going to retrace and come all the way back down to $1.98 before buyers would step in and defend. Well, delta to delta, $1.98 was met. Sellers tried to overpower buyers. Buyers defended from where they previously bought before back in April. And they retested the $1.98 level. And from there, we pushed price all the way back up to where we're currently trading at now at about $2 to 28 to $2.36. So that was just a Zoom call. That just goes to show the level of accuracy and what we trade with and what we pay attention to. We had mentioned at that time the risk off sentiment. If anybody remembers what took place in the middle of June, it was the Israel, Iran, United States whole entire debacle that created that risk off sentiment. Okay. So we properly analyzed that. Now moving forward to more recent times, this was yesterday's Zoom call. Yesterday's Zoom call at about 42 minutes and 13 seconds into the Zoom, I had annotated that if we did break above $2.28, the next target to the upside was $2.36 on XRP. And that if we failed to break $2.36, we would most likely see sellers start to defend at premium prices. And that, interestingly enough, we'd probably see at the same time some type of negative headline or headline that does not support aggressive risk buying, where sellers can then go in and defend their positions, and we'd see a retracement on XRP back down to $2.28 or possibly even $2.17 on XRP. That is exactly what took place today. If we go and we look at the lower time frame, yesterday when we were trading at $2.28, when we made that Zoom call, we came straight up into $2.36. Right when price action hit $2.36, we had all of the fundamentals from today released, where the market shed about $33 billion. We had Trump give some White House statements to two jurisdictions surrounding tariffs, and the market interpreted that as slightly negative. We'll go over that in just 1 second. Sure enough, at the same exact time that happened is when XRP's price rejected the $2.36 level. We came back down into the $2.28 range. Buyers are now seen defending this current price level, and we are kind of remaining stagnant in no man's land, trading in between these two deltas. So we're just going to cover what we talked about yesterday, then briefly go over the landscape today and talk about what we would ideally like to see moving forward in order to continue the bullish momentum, so the bullish momentum holds, in order to see higher prices on XRP, so that way we as a community can paint realistic projections utilizing actual institutional insights instead of drawing Fibonacci projections and using moon cycles and all these retail trading metronomics on our charts. Clear all that stuff away and understand what you guys have access to in this community and start to utilize that to your advantage. If you trade or you dollar cost average or even situate yourself in DeFi positions, you can use these deltas to your advantage because they are extremely accurate. They've literally never missed a beat. All right. So going back and looking at what took place yesterday, just to wrap up the ending of yesterday's report, I had mentioned to you guys that one negative headline, be it from trade wars, war in general, or any Fed speakers presenting hawkish rhetoric, is still enough to reverse sentiment quickly. Following suit with today's fundamentals, let's reiterate why we saw $33 billion shed from the total cryptocurrency market cap. So today, the crypto markets were down at time of writing this report about $30 billion following President Trump's announcement to reimpose 25% tariffs on imports from Japan and South Korea starting August 1st. So here is a breakdown of why the market interpreted this as negative and what we should watch for moving forward the remainder of this week. Here are those two statements. You guys can thoroughly read through them, so you choose to do so. I thought that I'd incorporate them in there. But why are the markets interpreting this as negative intraday? Number one, global investors interpret escalating tariffs as a signal of rising geopolitical and trade instability. That uncertainty causes a risk-off shift where capital flows out of riskier assets like crypto and equities into safer haven assets like gold, the dollar, or treasuries. And this is, again, just intraday. The sentiment could change tomorrow if Trump comes out on True Social Media and is seen high-fiving Japanese finance ministers, and they come to terms with some type of trade agreement, right? And we know that in this community, so we have to be on our toes. Number two, tariffs are inflationary. Higher tariffs on import goods from major trade partners like Japan and South Korea could lead to rising costs for American consumers and businesses. Inflation fears could resurface, which could delay Fed rate cuts, tightening liquidity, and hurting speculative markets like crypto. Number three, retaliation risks. Both letters warn Japan and Korea against retaliatory tariffs, but if either country does respond, a tariff war could escalate, further hurting global supply chains and investor confidence along with corporate earnings. So these are just the reasons why the market interpreted these letters as slightly negative or pessimistic today. Number four, lack of clear trade resolutions. Despite claims of wanting a 90-day trade deal in 90 days, only a few frameworks like the UK, Vietnam, and China have materialized. This suggests that trade diplomacy is lagging behind expectations, making the global macro backdrop look more unstable. And number five, markets were pricing in a softer outcome. After the April 2nd hardline dates were softened with the temporary 90-day pause to 10%, investors became hopeful of more deals and less aggressive protectionism. Monday's letters caught people off guard by reimposing the harsher 25% tariffs, a sharp reversal that signals unresolved tensions. So just so that way you guys understand these letters in detail, I wanted to break that down for you all. So what are we going to watch the remainder of this week? Geopolitical reactions. We need to watch how Japan and South Korea respond in the coming days. Will they seek exemptions or escalate? Retaliation would likely worsen market sentiment, while any positive announcements would still be enough to flip sentiment back risk on. Any additional letters to other nations. The White House has stated that 12 more letters will be sent, with more to follow. Any extension of 25% tariffs to other major partners like the EU, India, Mexico, could add fuel to the risk-off market sentiment. Trade deal announcements or any progress on updates. Market sentiment could recover if the U.S. announces meaningful deals that avoid tariffs with any jurisdiction, but particularly with China, the EU, or Japan. Keep an eye on language from both the U.S. and foreign officials over the next 2 to 3 weeks. As we've seen that date being pushed back to August 1st, that's why I put that 2 to 3 week marker. And then, of course, later on in the week, Wednesday, heading into the remainder of the week through Friday, any Fed commentary or any comments on inflationary data or labor market figures. So any suggestion from Fed speakers that rate cuts will be delayed could deepen crypto's correction. Conversely, any signals that cuts are still likely despite tariffs could ease selling pressure and support a risk-on mood. So in summary, the market's negative reaction is about more than just tariffs. It's about the uncertainty, the lack of trade progress, and the renewed risk of escalation. Crypto thrives in open risk-on environments. These developments instead suggest tightening global conditions, reduced liquidity, and protectionism in the short term. So in order to see risk sentiment turn around, that means in order for us to see a $30 billion plus day in the total cryptocurrency market cap, we need to see these types of headlines. De-escalation of progress in trade talks or any type of announcements or letters to other jurisdictions that the market perceives as positive. Confirmation that tariffs won't derail inflation or control or delay Fed cuts. Evidence that the U.S. global partnerships aren't breaking down further. Any dovish comments from Fed speakers, as we do have the FOMC meeting in minutes this week, and we have Fed speakers on Friday, I believe, that are scattered throughout the day. And then U.S. labor data that shows cooling in the labor market that supports Fed rate cut bets. So to wrap this up, I said until then, cautious sentiment still lingers. Something to note is the recent tariff update was not enough to derail risk sentiment to bring the total cryptocurrency market cap below previous weekly lows. As long as we are above the previous weekly lows, even though intraday sentiment might be weak, I am still cautiously optimistic that the risk on sentiment can continue as long as we are above $3.1 trillion. So let's break that down first. In an environment, in a scenario where we see all of these things materialize or any one of these things support a risk on rally, taking a look at the total cryptocurrency market cap and taking a look at some higher end XRP prices, we can go back and we can look at some of the deltas. So on June 30th, Scalper released these deltas here for some higher price levels on XRP. But if we go down to more recent times, we can see that yesterday, always giving you guys these targets in advance, these are back from Thursday, July 3rd at 8:30 p.m. And you can see that XRP was trading at about $2.28. The next level and area of interest that Scalper had identified back on Thursday was $2.36. So you guys always have these levels before the rest of the retail crowd in this community. So going over and slapping those on our charts, we can see that recently sellers have defended at that $2.36 range, and buyers have now come in and defended at $2.28. So when we're operating in between two deltas, I call this no man's land, or when you guys should not be touching price action, especially if you're traders, right? Especially if you're trading from delta to delta, don't try to force anything when the price action is just hovering in between these levels. So if we do see bullish fundamentals supporting a risk on market sentiment throughout the remainder of this week, looking at the higher time frame on XRP, again, what I could see is two scenarios taking place. First scenario, where intraday we continue to see market uncertainty, we continue to see fear, and we continue to see instability between different jurisdictions and trading partners create intraday risk off sentiment that allows for sellers to temporarily show their hand to push price back down into a discount where buyers find it stable enough to come back in and defend. So that scenario would be a drop down into $2.17 for buyers to come and defend and push price action back up into higher price levels. Scenario number two would be where we're currently trading at now, consolidation, fractal break in structures to the upside, a break above $2.36, and a retest. That would be a good clean signal to look for some scalp positions, especially if market fundamentals support a risk on market mood to take prices to higher delta levels. So scenario number one in a bullish environment would be a slight retracement back down into $2.17 for buyers to come back in and defend at previous prices. Scenario number two would be a bullish continuation move from where we currently stand to be patient, wait for a break above $2.36 and a retest to confirm that $2.36 can turn into support under risk on market conditions to then look for higher price levels on XRP. And if we can see either of these scenarios come into fruition, like maybe on July 14th, FedWire going live does have some type of positive implication on price action, and we can overcome sellers at $2.63, the next institutional delta above $2.63 does not come in till $3.39. So just to play around with some higher targets on XRP, if we were to see an extremely optimistic market sentiment and a massive bullish move, if we broke $2.63, that would open the door for a revisitation of $3.39. Anything above $3.39, the next delta comes in at $3.82 for some possible profit taking and realignment. Anything above $3.82 opens the door for $4.44, which is the highest delta right now that Scalper has given for institutional deltas. So for me personally, if we want to see anything higher than $4.50, we need to see buy pressure or buyers completely blow through $4.44 and not see sellers or any type of deteriorating market sentiment come into fruition at these levels if we were to ever get there. All right. But again, we need to take those level by level, day by day. We still have some sellers that we need to overpower at these lower level deltas before we can even consider those higher prices coming into fruition. Inversely, if we were to see the opposite and we were to see a breakdown, so in this report, I mentioned to you guys, if sentiment worsens and we break last week's low in the total cryptocurrency market cap, that will open the door for a deeper correction down into June lows around 2.9 to $3 trillion dollars. So that would be the inverse of these five things here: escalations or stalled progress in trade talks that deteriorate market sentiment, no confirmation that tariffs will lead to higher inflation and will delay rate cuts, further evidence that partnerships between global trade partners with the US are breaking down, meaning the EU sends messages or statements out saying that they're going to retaliate, that they're not happy with the tariffs. Same thing with Japan. Japan finance ministers and US representatives are clashing. Trump's coming out on true social media, causing a bunch of ruckus and uncertainty. Hawkish rhetoric or comments from Fed speakers that push back on rate cut bets, and any US labor market data that continues to show that the US labor market is strong and resilient, pushing back on rate cut bets. Under those conditions, we're most likely going to see either consolidation or deteriorating market sentiment and a further decline in the total cryptocurrency market cap, which would most likely lead XRP price to break back below $2.28 and start to make its way back down to our first bullish target of $2.17. If we do break $2.17, that's going to open the door for a revisitation of that key important level at $2.09. And in extreme worsening conditions, I still have buy limits set at $1.78, where the lowest buy delta that Scalper gave months ago that has yet to be revisited from back when it was hit on April 9th. But that would be in worse market conditions. And again, we have levels to overcome before we would even consider that taking place. So for now, $2.17 would be the first bearish target. Underneath of $2.17, $2.09. As for the total cryptocurrency market, as I mentioned, even though the market is down $30 billion on the day after this news, you can see, looking at last week's low, which came in at about $3.19 trillion, we are still substantially away from that, or far away from that level. Currently trading at about $3.3 trillion. So in order for us to break last week's low, the market would need to lose about $150 billion. So again, we've seen a lot of days like that, but what does that usually require? It usually requires some type of negative, pessimistic headline, and we have yet to see that. We've seen announcements via trade negotiations, and even though it soured market sentiment today, it was not enough to completely deteriorate the market sentiment, and we can clearly see that buyers are still slightly in control, even though sellers have recently defended at premium prices. We're not breaking higher lows in the market just yet, right? So that to me is a positive sign that even though today's sentiment is slightly deteriorated, as long as we are above the previous weekly low, we could still possibly see a continuation move or buyers remain in control. So for the total cryptocurrency market cap to wrap this up, in a continued positive, optimistic market sentiment via the conditions that I mentioned in today's report, I could see something like this: a continued pullback for buyers to reposition at discounted prices where they previously defended and bought from before, reaccumulation of orders to then push price back to the upside. Scenario number 2 would be support from where we currently stand, consolidation, an eventual bullish announcement that leads to a breakout and a retest of last week's high and a bullish continuation. Continuing the overall uptrend from when the ceasefire was announced back at the end of June. Inversely, if we do see market sentiment deteriorate, I would only start to be cautious if we saw market sentiment deteriorate enough to where the market sheds over $100 billion that would break us or start to send us below last week's low. That would look something like this: a failure to break last week's high, market sentiment deteriorating, and sellers starting to show their hand, overpowering buyers at about 3.2 to 3.19 trillion dollars. If we see something like this, we will reassess market conditions at that point in time. If sentiment continues to deteriorate below those levels, that could reopen the door for lower prices at $3 trillion dollars to possibly even below $3 trillion dollars at 2.9 to possibly 2.8. But again, we're not going to do overly exhausted projections. We have to overcome these barriers first. So the first bearish level that we would need to overcome is 3.19 trillion before we can expect anything lower than that. And that would be a day where we see over $150 billion gone from the market. So there would need to be some type of substantial announcement that completely deteriorates market sentiment from where it currently stands today. Right? So pretty simplistic at the end of the day. Just making an attempt to show you guys that we deliver accuracy here in this community. So hopefully you guys are paying attention. Hopefully you guys are crafting and creating your own analysis utilizing these deltas and the fundamental reports that we deliver. And nobody is confused and manipulated by the garbage that exists on the internet right now that is, in my personal opinion, meant to completely distract and manipulate retail traders into losing their hard-earned money, right? Which is honestly kind of shit if you ask me. It's kind of crap that this stuff even exists on the internet and that people are like not beating themselves up that they're able to put crap information out like this on the internet and sleep at night. It's wild to me. It's like people literally wake up to lie to people. It's super weird. I don't know. Anyways, that's today's report. That is today's technical analysis. Very simplistic. Make sure you guys thoroughly go through. You read today's report. Super simple landscape to understand. Nothing has substantially changed. We're going to continue to keep our eyes to the wire. Myself, Michael, is paying attention to these updates. Make sure that you guys tap into the fundamental section in the CYPRX Discord. Any single time that something breaks, I'm usually sharing things in this channel. And then same thing with Michael's breaking news section. He's always sharing important information in this section that you guys can tap into to gather insights on the current market landscape.